All right, this Hangout on Air is live. Welcome this morning. It is what's the date again? It's the 3rd of March, 2016. Welcome, everybody. For those that are watching live and those that will be watching later, hello to you as well. In today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about headphones and answer any questions that may arise. And we did have a couple of questions that came in, and I'd like to actually talk a little bit about those just now at the start here. The first one from Bernie Amcy, and again, Bernie, I've never actually talked to you face to face, so I don't know exactly how to pronounce your last name there. I apologize if I mispronounced it. But good question here from Bernie. Hi, Curtis. I would like to know from your wealth of experience, can you say that turning your headphones volume to its loudest can give you a wrong recording information or the wrong impression? And I think that's a good question on a lot of levels that I'd like to talk about here. First of all, I think if you have to turn your headphone volume to its loudest to hear, that's an indicator that there's probably something wrong. And the things that I would look at to see if something's wrong are, first of all, it could be that your gain structure isn't quite right. That is to say that you're not applying enough amplification to the microphones. So that would be the very first thing I think to look at and make sure that you're getting a strong enough signal. That's where you would rely on your meters quite a bit to help you make that. Also, if your recorder supports it, if it has a PFL or a pre-fader listen, that would be helpful as well, because then you can see if you have something set incorrectly on your recorder or mixer. And again, that's going to help you to determine whether or not you have enough gain applied to each channel, individual channel. And that'll allow you to listen to that individual channel's level with just the gain applied. No other effects, no EQ, no faders, nothing else beyond that, just the gain. So that's another thing to look at. The next thing I hear, I say, and I say this with seriousness, please don't anybody take this the wrong way, but if you're having a hard time hearing, there could be something wrong with your body's ability to hear. So I say that with seriousness, and actually I should tell you a little bit of a story here, a personal story. I actually had experienced a little bit of a head injury last year, and it affected my hearing, at least for a period of time, hopefully not permanently, but just the head trauma can do funny things to your body overall, including your hearing. So if you are concerned that perhaps there's something wrong, if you can see a doctor, I would definitely highly recommend it. Another thing is the impedance specification on your headphones can make a difference as well in relation to the headphone amp in your recorder or a camera or whatever it is you're using. So if you've got relatively high impedance headphones, by high impedance, if you're looking at anything that's probably higher than 250 ohms on its specification, that you will typically require a headphone amplifier that has a little more kick to it, a little more power. And so you'll have to turn your headphone volume up higher if you do have a higher rated impedance specification on your headphones. So you might need to switch out to some different set of headphones. And we're going to talk about those headphones today and look at the different options. So stick around for that. Now, another thing too, I think what you're really, one of your questions is, do you feel like it can give you the wrong impression about what's being recorded? And I think, yeah, what's going to happen there is that you're going to, with headphones, what you're listening to is not only what's coming in and what's being recorded, but you're also picking up all the self noise that's being generated by the headphone amplifier itself. And typically, if the manufacturers, if they have to control costs on the device that they're designing and producing, especially in the consumer realm, they're going to generally cut costs on the headphone amplifier. And so when you turn it way up, you're hearing a lot of noise that's in the headphone amplifier and not necessarily in the recorded signal. And I find that to be the case on the headphone amplifiers on anything that I've used in the $1,000 US and lower range. Even the Zoom F8, which I love and is a fantastic recorder, does not have a perfectly clean headphone amplifier. And So that's something to consider as well. It's going to be, if you're concerned about noise in your recording, you have to know your recorder really well. And if you know that your recorder has a noisy headphone amp, you can't turn the volume up way up on the headphones and expect to be able to really clearly assess if you've got a noise problem there necessarily. Now, if you've got a very obvious one, yes, you'll be able to pick that up. If you're picking up a lot of noise from an air conditioner or a heater or something like that, most decent headphone amps will be able to help you do that, but you shouldn't need to turn it up to 100% to get that. So Bernie, I hope those were some helpful thoughts on that. And I hope you don't have to turn your headphone amplifier up all the time because it's not the ideal situation. All right, and then our friend here from IGIS Productions, who happens to be here, by the way, good day. And he's the happy new owner of a Zoom F8. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your impressions with the Zoom F8 so far?
Well, it's really amazing because I was coming from the Taskman D60, and it's a big step, I think, above. Is really the first impression is that it was smaller than I thought, and but it's very robust, it's very solid, and I think it will do very well the job.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what I expect.
Very good, very good. All right. Well, you had a good question too that I think we should talk about here, and that is, which is best for mixing audio in post, speaker monitors or headphones? Could one of them substitute the other? And that's actually a very good question that I'm working on, again, the post-production course. And that's one of the questions, obviously, or one of the topics that we have to cover is monitoring, because that's critical for post-production, of course. And that is a question that comes up almost constantly: headphones or monitors? And by monitors, I mean near-field monitors. Here, I'm going to move the camera, so if this makes you motion sick, I apologize in advance. Here are my monitors. To be honest, these are not the best. You haven't seen me endorsing these because I don't necessarily endorse them. But I have that, and then I have another set here. These are kind of a ghetto monitor right there, if you will. But these are slightly better here. These are the two drivers. I have a woofer, and then, of course, there's a tweeter as well. And let's talk about monitors versus headphones for just a minute here for post-production. So this is strictly in the context of post-production, and that's going to be when you're editing your audio. I think the traditional wisdom is that when you're editing and mixing audio, one of the best things you can, well, you really probably should be using monitors as opposed to headphones. That's a traditional wisdom, and I think generally that's the ideal situation. I mean, ideally, yes, you should be using monitors, but I don't think it's necessarily 100% hard and fast rule. But I will say this: when I'm mixing audio, I almost always, probably, I would say 75% of my mixing I do on the monitor, the near field monitors, and then the remaining percent I do with headphones. And I think there are a couple of considerations. First of all, for one thing, obviously the first thing you want to consider is your audience. How will your audience be listening to your piece, whatever it may be? Are they going to be listening on headphones? Are they going to be listening on earbuds? Are they going to be listening on, proper speakers? How are they going to be listening? So if you know, for example, that your audience is going to be listening on headphones, I think you may want to switch it up when you're doing your mixing. Maybe you will want to do more of your mixing on headphones. There are some significant limitations and benefits to both headphones and monitors. The nice thing about monitors is that they produce sound within a larger space and a more realistic, natural space, if you will. So they're producing sound in a room, and you're experiencing the sound in that room. So that comes along with all of the natural interactions that sound will do in a room, and you hear very naturally that way. I mean, out when you're just experiencing life, that's how you hear sound, is in the spaces. So that's an advantage for monitors. The other advantage for monitors is that because they're producing sound in a space, generally they'll have the ability to produce a larger frequency range than you can typically experience within headphones. So that's something to consider as well. Some people suggest that, for example, a lot of the bass frequencies, and I think we all know this, but when you listen on headphones, it's harder for the headphones to produce a lot of the lower frequencies. So that's usually, oftentimes, an advantage of monitors, that you're going to get a little bit more bass in the monitors. Now, headphones are nice because they avoid some of the issues that monitors have. So one of the issues that monitors have is if you set up a monitor and you're using, or monitors, and you're using them in a space that is not very good acoustically, you're getting a lot of problems as well with monitors. So until recently, I was in my little mixing room here. This is a typical bedroom in a home in the West, and it's what is it? I don't know what it is in meters. I think it's probably 4 by 5 meters or so, somewhere in that range. It doesn't sound very good. And what happens in technical terms is that in a small bedroom like this, when these monitors are producing especially bass in, say, and these are spec'd to produce bass down to 45 hertz. When they start producing bass down in that realm, they're using a ported design as well. So there's a hole in the speaker specifically so that you can produce lower frequency sound. The problem is in bedroom like this, a lot of that bass energy builds up and stays. It continues to perturb the air, I guess is the right word, or perhaps one way to say it. But what happens is when it does that, when that bass stays there, it starts to constructively and destructively affect the rest of the sound that's coming out of the speakers. So it interacts, it eliminates some sound, and it adds additional sound that's actually not in the recording. So things can get pretty messy. So that's the downside of monitors. Using near-field monitors helps a little bit because you don't have to turn it up to higher volumes. They're made for listening in close. So that helps a little bit, so you're not going to get quite as much buildup in your room with that. One thing I didn't show you, and let me show you again really quickly. I'm going to move the camera here again. But again, in these ported monitors, this is the port right here, and you can see I've actually stuffed socks in there. And yes, I washed them before I stuck them in there, so they're clean. But and I don't know, different people feel differently about this. This came from, I actually learned that from, don't remember his name. Mixing Secrets is the name of the book, but he writes for Sound on Sound, and his recommendation was if you're going to buy a set of monitors for less than 1,500 US and they have ports on them, the ports are probably just creating more trouble than they're solving. So you probably just want to stuff socks in them.
I read that before also.
Yeah, and it's and I actually, what was interesting is I actually measured my room. I have a measurement microphone, and I have there's an app called Room EQ Wizard, which allows you to send an impulse through your room, and you can record it with the measurement microphone, and it measures how long, it measures the frequency response of your room, so it can tell how much of each frequency you're getting, but also how long it stays in the room. And what that found was that before I put the socks in the port, I had a lot of bass in the room that was sticking around for a really long time and interfering with all the other sound. So I then put the socks in the ports and remeasured, and the bass response was much better. It didn't stay nearly as long. It wasn't perfect, but it was a little bit better. And interestingly, I think some people might think, and actually I thought when I first read that doesn't make sense. If you do that, you're not going to get as much bass out of your monitors, and you're not going to be able to hear as well. Well, that may or may not be true, but in the end, I found like it sounded like I was getting a better overall representation of what was recorded when I stuck the socks in the ports, because then I didn't have quite the issue in the room. So those are some thoughts on monitors. Headphones have the advantage of not having to interact with a room. So you have the benefit of generally not getting those types of issues where the bass is necessarily building up in the room and creating comb filtering, constructive and destructive interference with all the other frequencies, and sort of misrepresenting exactly what's recorded that you're listening to. Headphones, on the other hand, though, are a little bit different because they don't, your ears are not hearing the same way they hear naturally. And what I mean by that in practical terms is that your ears actually hear in a space typically. So if a sound is coming from off, off this side, this ear is going to hear it first. However, the sound is then going to bounce off any walls, if there are any, and come back to the other ear. So there's going to be a natural phase response that you hear. You're not going to hear that with headphones. So that's good and bad, again. So that's why I think ideally when you're mixing and editing your audio, it's best to have both if you can, to have both monitors and headphones so you can put both on or you can listen with both and be able to contrast the differences. And then you'll be able to come to an understanding of what is happening in the recording versus what is being produced by your monitors or your headphones. So again, ideally both. Can one replace the other or substitute the other? That's the really good question. Again, if your audience is if you know the majority of your audience is going to be listening on headphones, maybe you could get away with mixing just on headphones. There's also a cost consideration. Doing the mixing and editing on a set of monitors that are not made for reference or not made for mixing audio, that can be a hard thing. It can be done, but what I recommend is that before you distribute your piece, you're probably going to want to go and listen to it on a variety of different speakers. Listen in your car, listen on your home hi-fi if you have one, listen on your home TV if you've got one. Try it on a lot of different sources just to make sure that whatever you've done to your mix, whatever editing you've done to your audio, sounds good on a variety of sources. Because I have excuse me, I have noticed when I was getting started in particular, and before I knew my monitors and my headphones very well, there were cases where I did the mixing, it sounded awesome, and then once I actually saw it broadcast or played somewhere else, it didn't hold up so well. Excuse me just a second. So you can definitely do it on non-reference monitors. You can do it with headphones, but you need to come to know your playback devices pretty well. So I hope that's helpful for you.
Yeah, sure.
That's a long answer to a short question.
Yeah, very good, very good.
Good.
That's understood to make comparison between one and the other, and with the TV set and with the home high fidelity environment, and so.
Yep. Between all that, and actually another thing you can do as well that is really helpful is if you have some reference audio you can listen to on whatever you're going to be mixing on, that helps too. So what I mean by reference audio is some sort of program that you've heard before, preferably you've heard it a lot of times, and preferably you've heard it on a lot of different systems. You've heard it on maybe in your car, on your TV, and you know it sounds good. If you can play that back on what you'll be mixing on, that'll give you an idea too of what your playback devices, your monitors or headphones are doing to the audio. So that'll give you kind of a reference or a starting point, which is helpful.
Okay, very good. Very useful. Thank you.
Oh, you bet. All right. It looks like another question. Oh, that's a technical question. Bernie can't seem to connect. I apologize, Bernie. We're going to keep going, but I'll work with you afterwards here to hopefully get that problem solved. Let's jump in and talk a little bit more about headphones. So I am going to share my browser here, and let's get going on that. Okay, so there are two kind of main things you need to consider. Well, there are several things to consider, but there are generally two different purposes for headphones. One is going to be during production when you're actually recording, and the other is for when you're doing post-processing. And they require, in my opinion, they require two different types of headphones. So what you see on the screen here right now are the Sony MDR7506 headphones. These are probably the most popular headphones or the most common headphones used by location field mixers or recordists when they're actually recording. They're very popular. They're fairly reasonably priced. This is the US dollars price currently at B&H Photos, so they're about $80 US. They fold up nicely, So they're easy to move around. They're very comfortable. What I really like about these, I've used them on a gig before, is that they're easy to put them on one ear and then still having them on your head, be able to put the other cup behind your other ear, and they'll stay on very nicely. So if you're trying to hear both the natural sound in the space where you're recording, plus also have the monitor coming off of your recorder, it's really easy to do that. They fold up nicely again, so that makes it a little easier to transport them in your sound bag or wherever you're carrying them in. And they sound fairly accurate. They are, you'll notice, closed back, and that's an important thing. That's what makes them good for location and recording work. The reason you want closed back, of course, when you're doing that is you don't want sound bleeding out of your headphones and getting into your recording as well. So that's kind of the main consideration for production recording headphones, is you want something that's closed back, you want something that's comfortable, you want something that's reasonably accurate so you can actually assess if there are any problems with your recording that you can address right there on the spot. And the Sony MDR 7506 do really, really well at that, at what I would call a pretty reasonable price. You can see here, for B&H, this one has 874 reviews, 4.5 stars. I think that's a pretty good representation in my experience of the quality of these microphones. So they're very good, and you can see they're very popular. Most of the other devices or gear on B&H don't have quite that many reviews, so you can see that's a pretty common choice. So again, I'll put a link for that down in the links below if you're interested in looking at that in more detail. Now, in terms of specifications, let's look at those. You can see here the impedance specification is 63 ohms. That is a relatively low impedance spec, and what that means in practical terms is that pretty much any recorder or mixer should be able to power these these headphones very easily, and you should be able to get plenty of signal, plenty of volume out of them. So that's an interesting thing to look at as well. So I think that's another reason they're very ubiquitous, is that they can be used with lots of recorders with no problem. The thing you have to consider is that for the less expensive recorders, again, they'll typically have less expensive preamplifiers, less powerful, sorry, not preamplifiers, but headphone amplifiers, important distinction. And they will be the ones that will struggle more if you had a higher impedance rating on the particular headphones you were using. But again, these could be used with almost any recorder. Moving on to the next one here, just a couple of other options that are out there that other people really seem to like. Sennheiser makes the HD 280 closed back monitors. You could use something like that as well. You know, ideally, these have the rotating cups as well, so they're a little bit easier to pack and take with you. They look. I haven't used these. They look reasonably comfortable. I have heard other people like them, so that's another option to consider out there. Again, if we look at the specs on these, the impedance again is 64 ohms. So that's anything, again, 250 ohms and under is going to be it's going to be able to work with almost any recorder. Once you start getting up into the 600 ohm realm, that's when things I think could get a little bit more tricky. So you'll want to be careful there. And then one other option that I know is very popular, and in fact my brother, I believe, has a pair of these. He loves them. Are the Audio-Technica ATH M50X monitors. And let's see here, impedance is 38 ohms. So you can see all of these are going to be pretty easy to drive. These are things you could also even listen to your phone. You know, if you're playing music on your phone, the impedance rating is low enough that you shouldn't have any problem driving these headphones as well. So again, the thing you're looking for production, closed back, they need to be comfortable, and they need to relatively accurately represent what it is you're recording. And I think all three of those would fit the bill pretty nicely. We don't have time to cover obviously there are lots of others. The nice thing about these as well, the Audio-Technicas, is they have these removable cables. So if you're out in the field recording and something happens, they're actually user replaceable cables, whereas that's not necessarily the case with the Sennheiser or the Sonys. The Sonys are fixed cables. Same with these particular Sennheisers, I believe. So that's another thing to consider if you're doing a critical job and you have, if something happens to your cable, being able to swap one out is a nice feature as well. All right, let's move on and talk a little bit more about post-production headphones and what you're looking for in post-production. The biggest thing you're looking for in post-production is an open back design. You can see here with the AKG K702s, which are very popular for this purpose as well. They have an open back design. You really do want, I think, generally you're going to want something that fits over your entire ear. So that's what circumaural means. They're going to be more comfortable that way, and they're going to be able to produce, generally, they're going to be able to produce more accurate representation of what it is you're hearing. The downside with open back headphones is that sound is going to bleed out. So these are not necessarily something you'd want to take on the airplane with you because sound's going to get in and sound's going to get out, and they're not really made for that purpose. Again, they're made specifically for reference monitoring, where you need as accurate a representation of what it is that you're editing as possible. So the open back actually helps with that. Now, the first thing you'll hear most people say about open back headphones is that, wow, the sound stage is really wide. And yes, that's true. I think you'll notice a big difference the first time you use open back headphones, if you haven't already, that they do sound very different from closed back. Closed back always sound a little bit stuffy to me. But once you go to open back, they sound much more open, and they do, I think, represent the overall sound more accurately, and it's actually more pleasant to listen to be entirely honest. But anyway, these are a very popular choice for reference monitors. Again, for post-production, you can see here 35 reviews, 5 stars. So this is a very popular model. I have not used the AKGs. I have heard that they tend to be a little bit on the bright side. That is to say that they tend to emphasize the higher frequencies a little bit more. But lots of people have used these for post-production for both music and for film, and they've used them to good result. In fact, I believe, I think it was this particular model, I'm not 100% sure on that, but these have been around for a long time. Quincy Jones, who is sort of a very, very popular music producer and mixer, he was responsible, I believe, for Michael Jackson's Thriller album, for example, and I believe he used a set of an earlier generation of this particular set of headphones to do some of that mixing. So if they're good enough for him, they're probably good enough for most of us as well. The DT880 Pros from Bear Dynamic are the particular headphones that I'm using here, and that I use for most of my mixing. You can see here, in terms of impedance, they're rated at 250 ohms. They're designed to have a very analytical sound, and by that, of course, they mean they're really trying to accurately represent what the sound source actually sounds like. They're trying to be as accurate as possible. So they're made for that purpose. I've been very happy with them. You can see here on Amazon, they're currently selling for about $249 US. So they're not cheap, but I have been very happy with them. They do have they call it semi-open back design. They do not have a removable cable, so that's a kind of a downside, I guess, in some respects. But since I'm using them primarily in mixing, they don't get a lot of abuse, so they stay pretty close to me and my desk, and they don't get a lot of abuse, so I'm fine with that. I've been very happy with these. The sound seems to me quite accurate, and they're very, very comfortable for long mixing sessions. Very popular one amongst those that have a larger budget, as you can see here, these run about $500 US, are the Sennheiser HD 650s. These actually have a very open design, as you can see. They also have cables that come to both sides of the ear, which I find a little bit less convenient, but it's hard to complain when you have headphones that sound this nice. Again, quite accurate, and you can see in terms of specifications, these are rated at 300 ohms. So again, you may have to, you're going to have to volume up a little bit to get loud enough on these. Again, I would also, just a caution, don't go crazy loud with your headphones. You've got to be careful with your hearing. If you plan to record and do anything with sound for a long period of time, you've got to take care of your ears, and you can do damage if you turn things up too loud, so be careful on that. Here, I thought this was a little funny, but they actually spec this in terms of frequency response, 10 hertz to 39.5 kilohertz. Almost everything you see on the market today is often spec'd at 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. Sennheiser went a little a little broader here. I don't know if there's most people can't hear above about most adults, I should say, can't hear above 17 or 18 kilohertz. So I'm not sure what the benefit of that is, but there's another option out there. Another one, Bear Dynamic also has an option in the full open design with their DT990 Pros. These have been popular for a long time as well. They don't really necessarily sell these as reference, although they call it for critical listening. And I think that they're trying to appeal a little bit more to the crowd that are audiophiles and like to have just the best in terms of audio reproduction equipment. But that's another option out there as well. So that was a quick look at headphones. Again, I think that the important thing to keep in mind is that with headphones, for production, of course, get a set that are comfortable and reasonably accurate. I think if you don't know where to start, the Sony MDR7506 is a great place to start. I am actually using the Bear Dynamic DT770 Pros. We didn't talk about that this morning. The problem with those, I use them because they're so comfortable. And I love them. I've had them for a long time. They're comfortable. They work well for me. A lot of people don't like them for production sound work, though, because they don't fold up. And so they're kind of a pain to carry around. And they're big. So you have to find what works for you. But I think if you're not sure where to start, I think the Sonys would be a very good place to start. And I think you'll get accurate sound and you'll get a comfortable fit in most cases. Mm-hmm. That's another thing about headphones. It's very personal. Everyone's head is different. Everyone's ears are different in terms of physical shape. So one set of headphones that a lot of people love, other people may hate. So you're going to have to kind of find what works for you. There's no hard and fast rules on that. So, all right. I think what we'll probably do is kind of pause it there, and we'll see what kind of questions fall out. If you do have further questions that you'd like to discuss, we, of course, will have future sessions where we can go into more detail. I hope that was helpful for you. Thanks for joining today, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You bet. My pleasure. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you later.
Okay.